Hello. Just gonna just checking the volume is coming through to the online event. Thank you to Jackie Jones for saying looking forward to hearing more about the exhibition, and from Derby, from Image Magic. Thank you for tuning in tonight for Assembly Online. My name's Henry, as lots of you will know. Tonight we have an open discussion around the exhibition which is currently on at the Hostry at Norwich Cathedral. I'm not going to say too much about it because we have the curators here, plus several of the artists from the exhibition who will be talking about their work. And as they're all on the call, I'm going to pass straight over to Nicola and Caroline now. Oh, sorry.
Okay, we ready to go?
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
right,
sorry,
well,
please.
Thank you. That's fine. Thank you very much indeed for the introduction, Henry. Welcome to this discussion. Nicola and I are going to, just to give you an idea, we're just going to tell you a little bit about the background to the exhibition itself. We're going to then pass over to the artists who are going to talk about their work and their response to the exhibition. And then there's going to be questions at the end, so an opportunity for everybody to ask questions that they're keen to do. Could you please post them in the chat room? And that way Henry will be able to have a look and help us when we come to the end of the presentations. So the exhibition is called Undisclosed. It is an exhibition raising awareness of modern slavery, which is a 21st century crime. It's currently on at the Hostry at Norwich Cathedral and runs until the 18th of April. Now, Nicola and I are both co-curators of this exhibition. And about 2 years ago, we set up a community interest company called Discourse CIC, so that we could actually raise awareness of contemporary issues. And this is our first exhibition that we have actually co-curated, and we're very interested to see how this develops and for the feedback. So we're very keen to hear your views on it all. We have worked with strategic partners on this exhibition, who include Hope for Justice. They are an advocacy charity who help survivors of modern slavery to find new pathways as they move forward. Also Norwich Cathedral, which is hosting the exhibition and has hosted to a conference which has taken place. The Mekong Club, which is our international connection here, they actually are based in Hong Kong and have been helpful in framing some of the work that we have been involved with and giving us guidance. And finally to Rotary, who have been strategic again in developing our international understanding of modern slavery and also bringing it back locally. So it's been an interesting journey and one that I'm sure you're going to be looking forward to hearing more about. So I'm going to pass over to Nicola now, who can tell you a bit more about the background to the exhibition.
Good evening. Just to give you a little bit of background information, the Global Index estimates that there are 40.3 million people in slavery around the world. That equates to about 2/3 of the population of the UK. And the UK police have estimated that there are in and above 100,000 victims in the UK. So just to give you some background information, well, Carol and I decided to co-curate this exhibition because we really believe in the potential of art to generate dialogue and inspire change. And from the research from the NGOs and the police, we've discovered that raising awareness is the #1 way to fight against modern slavery in the UK. So we wanted to come up with creative ways to really to let people know about the nature and scale of human trafficking and modern slavery within the UK. And we felt that an exhibition was a really great way to kind of elevate the social cohesion around modern slavery, and to engage people in conversation in the injustice of the situation. And we feel that artists really have a cultural capacity, that they can engage, they can communicate through materials and through image and through objects, and encouraging sensory responses by provoking, dismantling, interrupting, reframing, and challenging perspectives. But I guess Carol and I are not just here because of the compelling statistics and because of our interest in the arts. We both have a personal experience. So, for example, I lived overseas for many years in developing countries, and 2.5 of those were spent in Sudan, in Khartoum, where I saw modern slavery firsthand for the first time. It was endemic and it was horrific, and I really felt angry by what I saw and wanted to act. At the time, I wasn't really sure what to do. So the opportunity arose many years later when Caroline approached me to do this exhibition. So that was about 3 years ago now. So over to you, Caroline. You can explain your personal.
And my response towards this, or my contact with this, was mainly through Rotary, and it's been, I suppose, about 20 years now when somebody introduced the idea that modern slavery needed to be tackled. And from that sort of initial conversation, I've been involved in international conferences and meeting people who've had a lot to do with eradicating the problem. And then 4 years ago, I was invited to chair a symposium on the subject in Nottingham. And Nottingham is where the Rights Lab is based. And they're actually the sort of main leaders on solving solutions to the crime. And at that symposium, there was a young woman who spoke. She was a PhD student at the time. And she spoke about how people only listen to stories. And she was about 3/4 of the way through her presentation when she then went on to say that she herself had been enslaved by her own parents. So at the end of her presentation, I thought, well, I'm chairing this, I better say something and respond. And I actually did very publicly say, right, well, I'll do something more than just listen to your stories. Her point being that people will listen to a story of somebody who has survived slavery and then walk away and think, well, there's nothing I can do about it. So discussing with Nicola, we set about the idea of what could we do to raise awareness and inspire people to do something, to think more deeply about it and to respond. And so hence Undisclosed was born. At the moment, the timeliness of this actual exhibition with the situation in Ukraine is actually very pertinent. We've had a lot of people through the gallery who have been raising the issue of Ukraine and the refugees and migrants and their current situation. So we actually know and are aware that poverty, lack of opportunity and vulnerability are main drivers when it comes to modern slavery. And we've been talking to some of the NGOs about this, and they are extremely worried about that situation. So we've done a lot of listening in the past 6 weeks, and it's sort of backed up our feeling that we actually, this is a subject that needs to be an open conversation. So at that point, I'm going to stop and pass over to Nicola, and we'll take it from there.
So just a briefing before we pass over to the artists. We just wanted to mention that the artists were selected really because of their subject specialism, because they have research-led practices. Also because they demonstrated a real sensitivity in handling complex and delicate issues in their previous work. And also they're very accomplished, so that they've exhibited both here in the UK and abroad. Many of them have presented research papers both here and abroad, and the majority of them are educators. So I'll pass you over. Maybe Vanessa, you'd like to introduce your project or your response to the Undisclosed. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So I'm going to share my screen for some images and just get that set up. So please bear with me while I get that to be full screen. Okay, hopefully everyone is now seeing my screen. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of a combination of speaking to some words that I'd kind of written previously, but also ad-libbing a little bit, but I'm conscious that I don't want to go over time, so I'm going to try and keep track of that as well. So my name is Vanessarolfe, and I'm an artist who predominantly uses textiles and stitch. And in response to Undisclosed, I made 2 patchwork quilts from waste clothes. So these works, which these images that I'm sharing, the first 2 images are the works that are in the exhibition that were made in response to this prompt, this brief that came from Nicola and Caroline. So the first one is titled Hidden, and it relates to the export figures of clothing and textiles. And these are isotope maps. So the data is shown as equal comparable units, and they're positioned relative to their geographical location on a map, but obviously they're hugely distorted. And they have lots of omissions, so lots of countries don't appear on this map. And even though, in theory, this kind of data visualization, the ambition of that kind of visualization is to simplify and make clear the data, actually, I was really interested in the fact that these works were actually kind of adding layers of complexity to understanding the problematic situation. So this piece was the export figures of clothing and textiles, and this piece related to the import figures of clothing and textiles. And they've all been created with waste clothes, which were donated by Oxfam in Winchester. And these were clothes that they had been donated by members of the public, but the Oxfam were unable to sell. So it might have been that they attempted to sell them and no one wanted to buy them, or it could be that they were not good enough quality to resell. So kind of part of my interest really stemmed from the initial, when I initially started looking at this subject of modern slavery, the figures and the numbers around those statistics just seemed huge to me and kind of overwhelming. And I started to think about, almost as somebody who hasn't had personal experience, how I related to those numbers and how it galvanized me into action. What difference could I make to such huge statistics? So this was kind of my starting point, was thinking about those statistics and how ubiquitous they were and how widespread. So the image you're seeing on screen is, again, it's those export figures. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to research figures that related specifically to exploitative practices in textiles and clothing, which I think, you know, everyone's really familiar with child labor and sweatshops and those kind of exploitative practices in clothing. But actually trying to find any data was really, really hard. And it's just not broken down by specific industries. So I'm going to sort of show you a little bit of my process, just because I'm aware that, you know, I'm going to talk for too long. So I basically took that data and translated it into a isotope map. And then I was really thinking about the kind of the value in the labor of the creation of the work, of the initial textiles. So I unpicked the garments and then reworked them into this framework of the isotope map. And it was a slow and laborious process. And I think just that sort of length of time, that gathering and unpicking and then reconfiguring, allowed me to really sort of explore my own thinking about those connected relationships with the people who labor on our behalf to make the clothes that we wear. And so this is the work in the exhibition in Norwich. And I think that really my reflections on the research that I did was that it was a hugely complex situation, and one that is eternally sort of fluid and changing, and that is how exploitation kind of gets into those situations, because they are hard to track. And once they have been tracked and data has been gathered, then the system has moved on, and people have found new ways to sort of to exploit others. So I think really kind of, I don't know, my kind of reflection on making this work was really just to think about my capacity to reflect on this very global situation, and that we really need to demand that people's labour is valued on our behalf. So I'm hoping I've kept roughly to time. And I'm going to finish sharing my screen, if I can get my... There we go. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vanessa. Sorry, I was muted. Judith and James, would you like to present your work?
Absolutely, yes. Judith, did you want to share the images as I talk?
If they work.
If they work.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm James Quinn, and I'm in charge of introductions. So, this is Judith Stewart, my collaborator. We're both lens-based artists. By that I mean predominantly video and film-based. And more recently, we've been working in other mediums, photography, print, and always artist books. Our collaborative practice has sort of been going on for 5 or so years. And what you're seeing, not just in our case, but for every artist in Undisclosed, are sort of 2 years worth of conversations, of ups and downs, of successes and failures, to do with sort of developing this project. And as you might imagine, our initial approach wasn't necessarily the one we settled with. So initially we thought we would go for a more participatory approach, in that we were interested in speaking to migrant agricultural workers working in the local landscape, the Norfolk landscape, and particularly this idea of the affective quality of landscape, and trying to unearth sort of commonalities between some of these migrant workers' landscapes, their own landscapes they came from, and the landscapes they found themselves working within. And I think Judith is going to continue on from that point.
Yeah, so what we were very anxious to avoid doing was to replicate information about modern slavery that is already out there in the public domain. And Vanessa spoke about how we know about exploitation in the clothing industry, but it still goes on, and we're still sustaining it. And so we sort of had to think about how we'd approach this sort of question of migrant labor in the agricultural sector and in the countryside. And so we studiously avoided any idea of telling other people's stories for them. And so we were trying to sort of draw on our existing approach to landscape, which is, as James says, sort of concentrating on the affective relationship that people have with particular places. So that was our starting point, and we set out to try and find migrant workers who would be prepared to talk to us. And we came across all sorts of issues and stumbling blocks, ethical questions, having our pre-existing assumptions punctured rather
Abruptly.
abruptly and dramatically, which basically meant that we had to go back to the drawing board quite late on into the project. And
really, that was in a way a turning point, sort of that uncertainty that we were experiencing so late on in the project, as Judith was saying. And it was only really through the support of some of the group discussions that we had with our fellow artists exhibiting in Undisclosed. Specifically, there was a quote that we like to refer to. It's from Jonathan, who sadly can't be here with us tonight. And he talked about, as Judith and I are both from Norfolk, how we have as much right to talk about this landscape as anyone else. And that really was a kind of a resounding kind of comment, and it had a real sort of significance at that sort of turning point in the project, really. And instead of focusing in this sort of participatory project involving people, we started thinking, okay, what about places or sites of significance where perhaps some sort of historic acts of criminal activity or modern slavery might have taken place specific to Norfolk. And really, it was within minutes of a very sort of cursory research where immediately various incidents presented themselves through sort of news articles online. And more significantly, really, was that various sites had a very personal connection to both myself and Judith. And that was really the sort of territory where we started to develop the project and find traction, really. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about each work in the exhibition now.
Yeah, so we ended up, the three sites almost chose themselves, because they cropped up, as James said, very, very high up on the Google search list. And the three sites that sort of sprung out at us had this very personal connection. So two of them were basically where we respectively grew up, and the third was somewhere that we both had personal connections to as well. So what we decided to do was to go and visit these sites and see what emerged from it. So we went with no particular predetermined idea of what we would see. So this work, there's three works in the exhibition, and each work relates to the sites that we uncovered. And so this one, it's a road. This is called Bradnam Road, and it drives you past one of the sites. And what was significant in this, when I was filming it, was that, what it revealed was how you can't see anything. That over the hedge was this farm that couldn't be seen because it was hidden by trees, but which a few years ago had been a major incident, because there was a cannabis farm which was being sort of farmed by modern slaves, and there was a big raid on it, but you wouldn't know it. And so you drive along this road with lovely Norfolk countryside, and yet these things are going on behind the trees, behind the hedges. And so the road takes us from this village and the site of the cannabis farm, which was a former pig farm, and it takes us into the market town of Swaffham. And
Swaffham, particularly to me, was an extremely significant site, in that I grew up 10 minutes away from that street, particularly Station Street. I went to school in Swaffham, lots of childhood memories, lots of nostalgic kind of emotive connections to that town. And it was a real kind of moment of reckoning when I did this initial research and discovered that on the 27th of November 2017, 3 men were arrested on human trafficking charges on that very same street. So trying to somehow reconcile this very personal, nostalgic quality that road, that town has, as well as the fact that for those of us that might be more familiar with Norfolk and indeed with Swaffham, it's got a kind of idyllic connotation, really. It's a market town. So sort of reconciling that fact, that kind of criminal activity with this experience, this subjectivity of my own, that really was the driving point for this work.
And so the final site is Porter's Lane in Lenwade, and it's a little industrial estate on the site of the old station yard, which railway no longer exists. And the railway line has been turned into, like many ex-railway lines, it's now a sort of public right of way for cyclists, walkers, horse riders. So it's got this sort of leisure thing with holiday makers going along there, and yet over this hedge and through the trees is this sort of industrial estate. And when I went to film and record there, again, I was sort of taken by the inability to see anything. That, you know, not only is it screened by hedges and trees and barbed wire and fences, but also the buildings themselves are impenetrable. So again, this was another cannabis factory. It was one of the biggest halls of cannabis, and again being run by 5 modern slaves who were being kept there. And so what I think we sort of found from looking at these sites was this sort of shock of, these are places that we know from our childhoods, that now have this other connotation to them. But also how and sort of linking back to the Ukraine situation at the moment, and with other cases where migrants are fleeing disasters, is that if there is no legal way of actually coming into a country and being recognised and having the papers so you can get work and get accommodation, you're completely vulnerable. And so all of the sort of people who were victims in these cases, and obviously we're not talking about the sort of statistics that Nicola was citing at the beginning. We're talking about, you know, probably a dozen people, but all of those people involved in these sites had been caught up because they didn't have the documentation. And so that's sort of, you know, what you realize, this close connection between illegal criminal activity and organized crime and the plight of people who get swept up into it. And I think, I mean, one thing I should say is how much our research was informed by conversations not only with Matt, forget his name, Matt Friedman from the Mekong Club, but also with farmers and the police who are involved in trying to stop this.
Yeah, and I suppose it's also worth saying that these works, though we're presenting them, that the project in earnest doesn't quite feel finished, as if it were, and there still feels like conversations to be had. But what was interesting about what Vanessa's just shared is a kind of a point for reflection at the end, now that the exhibition is on display. I suppose the key takeaways is, at least for me, I think I'm speaking for Judith as well, that it's such a systemic issue, and how I suppose our works in the local landscape, in the Norfolk landscape, just how we experience landscape, how our experience of landscape can sort of uphold these criminal activities and allow them to take place in plain sight, really. I suppose it's a question of infrastructure, of how we travel or how we experience place. So we're still unpicking it really, but it's been a very sort of fertile, collaborative experience really. So I think that's one key thing is that we also have collected a lot of these thoughts on the sort of successes and failures of the project that I mentioned earlier, and have compiled them into an artist's book, which should be available on the Undisclosed website for those that are interested. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith and James. I'm going to pass over Melissa Pierce-Murray next to talk about her response to Undisclosed. Thanks a lot.
Hello. So I'm going to share my screen as well. Oops, here. Try that again. And so, I was going to lead you a little bit through my thinking in response to this theme when I was approached. And initially, when Caroline and Nicola approached me, I was thinking it was such a brave and challenging topic, and I was kind of questioning. I also had some trepidation because I questioned on what authority can I address this issue. But then I thought, well, perhaps the point is that we can help by educating ourselves and becoming more aware of the consequences of our lack of awareness. So I was interested in the relationships between environment and inequality and justice, and even sort of thinking from my initial thoughts about this, I just had some ideas about kind of, I guess, a link of chains or a sort of a link of buoys, and sort of this and so just from the outset I started thinking in material ways. I was also thinking about links between natural resources and commodities, so what I started looking, when I started researching, I got interested in supply chains, and so that's kind of the systems of organizations and people, activities, information, and resources that are involved in supplying a product or service. And we live now in a global economy, and we have things that are sourced from everywhere, and we live also in a very capitalist economy that prioritizes profit. But perhaps we don't have as much awareness as or lend as much credence or weight to the impact of the economic choices that we make. So that's kind of where I started with, and also perhaps so I started looking at these kind of materials, and I think that I was drawn to maybe thinking about mining, extraction, and so perhaps more earth materials, clay, stone, but also about the materials that are used in commodities. So so it might be steel, tin, or like we're trying to transition to more battery power, but the components of the materials for batteries and lithium and cobalt are extracted in areas that are not, we're not really aware of this, but there's this kind of long chain of between where we're getting the materials and where we're using them. So I was looking at this link between resources and labor, and then the idea of a supply chain is that it's kind of labyrinthine and opaque. So it stretches over countries and continents, and so we might be making kind of what we think are sensible purchases or decisions, or working with people in a local sense that are fine, but we don't know, kind of going back, all the conditions of how, where the material was sourced, where it was fabricated, where it was transported, and all those links. And so in my process, I started really looking and just collecting images that were resounding with what the thinking that I was having, and really this idea of labor and people moving around and people kind of not being able to find their work in, or make a livelihood in one place and trying to get to another place where they can perhaps have a better livelihood. This idea of this, I don't know, a weight or a link or a tie, and always a link again with how we are relating to the environment, and how like and our links as well with the change to the climate, how what we're doing to make our lives easier is actually really making life a lot harder in many ways, certainly for us, for all of us. So the so oftentimes we have a little insight into the conditions under which people are laboring, and goods are sourced and produced far from where they're bought. So, and they're successfully changing hands along complex and opaque global supply chains. And so the idea is that to counteract that, what we need to do is shift away from profit being viewed as a sole measure of success, and to kind of have an idea and to map out our relationships across the whole supply chain. Because a weakness in any link can result in unethical purchasing decisions, or difficult labor conditions, and it's also really imperative to have a consideration of sustainable development, of social justice, and to link environmental and social issues, kind of in terms of consumer products that I think we've mentioned a couple of them, but clothing, computers, phones, coffee, tea, fish, rice, tobacco, these are all areas that are the highest sources of instances of modern slavery, but also other things that you wouldn't perhaps think about, like charcoal or leather. They might be natural materials and sold as natural, but they might be made from deforestation in cattle ranching in South America, and that indigenous populations are being, there's a fine line between modern slavery and kind of just no lack of choice. So again, this link with the supply chain, if you're as a buyer saying, I'm not going to buy from somebody because they're using slave labor in their practice, or in their industry, then the people there still need money. They're still going to find other ways of doing it. So the best way is actually to maintain the relationship and trying to encourage education and encourage better labor conditions. So we really are kind of connected in this way. And so that idea of long-term training and education are kind of necessary in bringing about a step change in behaviors. So I guess, one of the things that we can do is in our choices as consumers, really bring an awareness and try the best we can. Modern slavery exists in large part because of our buying habits. And maybe not us individually, but we could, to the extent that we can raise awareness or try and be more mindful. But it's this idea of cheap labor. That every time that we get something, and it's like, oh, it's a really cheap. It's somebody else's labor. So we're all kind of locked in and implicated in this net and this web. So and I guess that, so this is one of the pieces, and this is another, and sort of this idea of the link between the physical, the environmental, and the global is really what I was looking to explore in this exhibition.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Caroline and I just have a few questions for you, and then we'll hand over to the audience if they have any further questions.
And people have touched upon it about initial reactions to being asked to be part of this exhibition. So I just wondered, we wondered if anybody would like to sort of say a little bit more about how they felt when they were first approached. So, Melissa, do you want to begin off with, because you touched on it?
Oh yes, well, yeah, it's an interesting thing, because I guess I just felt a little uncertain, and I think that was also interesting what James and Judith were saying, that comment that, you know, we all have our own authority. It's not really helpful maybe to think, you know, I can't speak because I don't have the experience. Is like, well, I can find out, and I can have a response, and that's and also, I guess the other thing that was really nice about this whole exhibition and this whole process has been feeling that I'm lending what I can do to a conversation that I care about, and that I feel that the values and the intention are ones that I feel like, well, maybe this can help. And I think that's that a lot of times we can start from a place of thinking, I don't know what to do. How can my little voice make a difference? So it's been really nice to be able to lend my little thing to this larger project.
Thank you. Vanessa, would you like to say something? That would be really great to hear from you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think my initial response was a little bit, you know, kind of, what am I bringing to this in terms of knowledge or expertise? You know, I have none. As well as just thinking, you know, that it's important that I don't think of myself as sort of being some conduit for someone else's experience and doing that really badly and insensitively. And also, I think maybe I had some sort of concerns about this being a platform for me, and sort of anxieties about, you know, that I'm getting to benefit from something that is someone else's negative experience. So I had some real concerns about that sort of dilemma. But at the same time, I think actually it came a brilliant moment, because I think I was just thinking a lot about sort of art as agency, and art as that kind of conduit for opening up really valuable conversations and articulating things that are hard to articulate in language, or connecting with people in a way that might be hard to connect through language. So actually, I think it gave me an opportunity to really explore some of those things quite deeply, and spend quite a lot of time thinking about my role in that conversation, and also how the materials and the processes sort of help to create a way to open people up to a conversation that they might find challenging or unsettling. Yeah, so that was, those were my thoughts.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And finally, we'll go to Judith and James.
Judith?
Right. I think our initial reaction was that we wouldn't be able to do it. That was, I think, because we are not used to, either collaboratively or in our individual practices, we're not used to sort of working to a brief in that way, or not a brief so much, but a theme. And my initial thing was, how would we do something for this on this theme that would meet your needs without us becoming didactic in what we were doing. So that was my initial thing. And I think when I had a conversation with James, it was his concerns mirrored mine.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of cherry picking really from what Melissa, Vanessa, and Judith have already said. Really, I suppose I like to think of, we were very fortunate in that we got to speak to, as we mentioned earlier, Matt Friedman, who also very kindly contributed a kind of an opening statement to the Undisclosed catalogue. And his opening sentence says that we're not winning the fight against modern slavery, or paraphrasing. And I suppose it goes back to what Vanessa was saying. Maybe there is a opportunity for the work, and also having spoken to Matt Friedman, some of the narratives and some of the stories that he was coming out with, so visceral. It gets to a point where it's a level of saturation in their abject cruelty that you, as an audience, and I'm speaking for the rest of the artists I know, but there was only so much that you could take on board, really. And maybe, again, back to what Vanessa was saying, that there is a way for the artwork to not circumnavigate those issues, but to find a different way of commenting or adding to that conversation. So that was sort of the hope as we went through the project, that we would find that suitable, honest voice, really, collaboratively, after those initial reservations.
No, it is a challenging subject, and Nicola and I had hours of conversations about how this was going to work. So we do really thank you for your contributions on this, and for accepting the brief in the first place. So I'll pass over to Nicola now.
Yes, and I mean, Caroline and I are very aware that the space between contemporary art and modern slavery is a very challenging one. And I guess my question to you, and some of you have sort of already hinted at it already, is, how did you navigate the ethics and the research for this project? Was there anything that anybody would like to share? Do you have any initial thoughts, Judith?
Yes. God. Yes. Well, being in a university brought a different layer to the ethics, which had to be gone through, which was a very tortuous procedure. But it does make you think about the ethical questions, and I was really interested in what Vanessa was saying about that sort of, on a personal level, how do you sort of overcome that thing that you are actually benefiting from this in some way, whether by taking part. I mean, that is an ethical question, and we talked quite a bit about that during the process, and how we would negotiate those sorts of things. If, for example, somebody wanted to buy the work, what do you do then? But I think, for us, the ethical questions came around the participants, when we were still attempting to engage migrant workers. And there were ethical questions about, even though these were not survivors of modern slavery or current modern slaves, they were, migrant workers, which, and I think, again, Melissa has said, where is this boundary between being forced to do it because of your economical sort of situation and being forced to do it because of fear and violence? And so when we were when we were sort of trying to negotiate that space with farmers and with workers, it just became really, really complicated about how you represent somebody who, you know, if we take the farmer, for example, who had been very generous in talking to us and introducing us to his workers and, you know, giving us loads of time and space. And then at that time, we were thinking of representing his farm and some of his workers in an exhibition that was to do with this topic. So that was one of the reasons I think that we didn't actually pursue it, because we realized it, you know, in trying to avoid one ethical problem, we'd fallen straight into another one.
Mm.
Mm.
I was thinking that, I was talking on a different level, that there's so many conversations that the discourse that happens is very antagonistic, and it's just like people on one side or another, and wondering how we can get to a space where we have a more collaborative sense, where can we create opportunity to listen to various different perspectives and to kind of be able to work together. And so for me, in a way, what I did was a little less ethically tricky than what the others have explained, because I was already interested in working with this idea of, the links between environment, the climate, social justice. And so for me, it was an opportunity to think, actually, yes, I'm not just making an interesting, pretty, object. I'm actually doing something with this object that can hopefully open up new conversations. And I think this idea about what Judith had said about working to a brief, it was kind of nice working in the way that we worked with this exhibition, where we all sometimes are together, but we all researched different areas, so that when we brought back our individual thinking, the total was greater than the sum of the parts. And also there's this lovely space for other people to come in and find a way to engage through the nonverbal objects. It's a kind of like it draws people in rather than puts their guard up. I think. So for me, there was a bit of a sense of possibility, potential, and it was expansive space rather than a nerve-wracking space.
I'm not sure that this is necessarily thinking kind of around ethics, but I think, like Melissa was saying, like one of the things about this opportunity to bring together these multiple conversations and multiple perspectives definitely challenged some of my existing thinking from the conversations that we were having. And one of the things that we sort of discussed, and I think maybe it came out of our experiences of listening to Matt Friedman's presentation, was that sort of experience of being an audience member and being shocked by these stories that he was telling us about what, as an audience member, you then do with that. Mm-hmm. Because almost the simplest thing to do is to shut that down, because it's huge, and you just think, I don't know what to do with those emotions, because they're not positive. And so thinking about kind of what we're inviting in terms of the audience as participants in the conversation, what we're inviting them to do, and I think we sort of spoke about that idea of just encouraging reflection, I suppose, really, with the audience, and curiosity about a subject. But also, I think that sort of fed into the making of my work, because I was using patchwork, which has got like a really long history and lots of narratives around the kind of communities that create that kind of work. I was also thinking about the sort of agency that you have as a producer rather than as a consumer, and just thinking about, and Melissa was saying about all of those kind of chains and systems that we're involved in, where we are complicit almost without our knowledge, even if we do huge volumes of research about our consumer choices. Still within those murky supply chains, we are invariably kind of engaging in something somewhere that is exploiting somebody. And so I think just, for me, I was sort of thinking about how you encourage the audience to feel a sense of agency, I suppose, about going away and making changes, or just speaking louder about, when Nicola said, it made me feel angry. It's like we should all be really angry. But what do you do with that feeling is, where do you take it? And I guess maybe, all of the opportunities that the show has created to have those conversations and work out how you amplify that anger to become action, I guess. So I'm not sure that doesn't really answer the question, but it just sort of grew from the other bits of the conversation.
I think if I just follow on with that, because I think there is a danger with this subject, as there is around climate change, in thinking that it's down to the individual to change, when actually it's the systems. So we talk about, it's like, it's our fault because we don't think about who's washing the lettuce and who's picking the asparagus or who's making the clothes, but actually where is the attention being put on those people who are making the enormous profits from this? And it's you can make some difference as individuals, but actually it's a pathetic amount, because the system needs to change, because otherwise all these things will just go on and on and on.
Yes, although the system changes by the political mandate that we give to those. So so that hopefully the idea is that collectively we can work towards nudging. And also just the more that we're aware of what's going on, the less perhaps. So I certainly agree with you. There's a lot about but I think that was one of the challenges for me too, is like, how to not feel like, just throw up your hands, he's like, well, how do we, try and move forward a bit.
Yes, please do, Henry. Thanks.
I'm just going to join one of you. Nicola, would you like to share the install shots just for people who haven't seen
yes,
the exhibition? Just while we're talking, it might be nice for people to see those. And maybe also, could you just would you be happy to give a brief summary, just a very brief summary, Nicola and Caroline, of the other artists who are in the exhibition who aren't involved in tonight's talk? I thought that could be...
Sure. One of the other artists is Jonathan Pulido, who is a Colombian artist. He's a painter, and he referenced his work. He's got one large painting, one small one with us. He referenced his work to his home country of Colombia, and it's based also upon Colombian architecture. And his first actual experience of art was seeing the graffiti that the guerrillas would write on the walls in the village where he grew up, very threatening comments. And his mother would then go out at night, and she was a teacher, and she would go out and she would paint over the graffiti, and with messages that this is a peaceful village, let peace come here. So he works in layers, and he writes and then he paints over them, and he writes and he paints over. The large piece he has with us is called Carter, referencing maps, and the small piece is called Patria, Homeland. And they're very bright very striking. And people who've been to Colombia walk in immediately and say, that's Colombia. It's also thinking about how in Colombia people do put on a very happy, smiley face as if all is right with the world, but internally they're feeling very much that life is very tough. And in his country, it's obviously 10-year-old boys who go off with the guerrillas and become guerrillas themselves, and the drugs cartels that exist. So that's his reference into modern slavery. The other artist who is not represented here this evening is Jo Pearl, who's a ceramicist, and she works with clay. She's got 3 pieces in the exhibition: a Janus head, where looking at a consumerism, where she is one half of the actual sculpture. She's showing a happy, smiling face because she's just got a bargain, and the other side of that is somebody who was enslaved, and she did actually take that image from somebody who was prepared to share their story with her. Another piece she has is of a slavery salad, and looking at all the different food within the industry and questioning whether it was picked or packed or grown by people who've been enslaved. And the final piece actually is called You Can't Walk Away, and it's of a foot, a ceramic foot, which is then chained, shackled. And whilst that very much takes one back to historical slavery, the piece that itself is about us as present day consumers. Once you know about something, you can't actually walk away from the issue of knowing something. So they're very different pieces, and they all tell different stories. Just going back to Jonathan's, one of his, he references a book called 100 Years of Solitude. And somebody came back into the gallery today and said, it is my favorite book. I came to the conference and I wanted to come back to see the painting. He said, I've read the book 4 times and I just had to see this painting for real. So there are lots of rewards and lots of things that we hopefully will be able to share with the artists that we've learned on the way. And the conversations that we've been privileged to have with people who visited the gallery are just overwhelming. They range from people saying it's about time that this was talked about, to some people being very knowledgeable, and some people still being in denial that it's a problem within Norfolk. But we have had some amazing conversations.
Just following on from that, Caroline, I don't know if you'd seen, but there was a comment on the YouTube chat just now actually saying something similar from Hannah Lister, saying, what have some of the responses been from visitors to the exhibition? Particularly people who have not known what the exhibition was about before they visited.
Right, now I hadn't seen that, but Nicola, do you want to add something as well with that?
Well, as Caroline just mentioned previously, I mean, there's been a whole range. I think people, because the exhibition, when you walk in, it's not dark, even though the subject matter is complicated and it's a dark subject. The actual works are beautiful, and so that alone helps people to engage in the work. And there's a huge curiosity, when I think particularly with all of the work, that people are curious. And so we have stewards at hand at all times, so that to make the work as accessible as possible. But there has been a range from people who are very knowledgeable about the subject to people, as Caroline mentioned, who are actually in denial. It's fine for it to happen on a global scale, but not in Norfolk, not in this county. So, yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to?
Yeah, I'm just the stewards who assist, who do a lot of the actual time spent in the gallery. I think that the comment that I got back from them was very much on the, well, we were doing this, we're doing it voluntarily. But the reward is having those conversations, and they are themselves very taken aback about how much art can convey something that is visual, can convey something so much more than than reading about information in the newspapers or online. And we also had that from somebody from Anti-Slavery UK who visited the exhibition, and she said, I can't believe, she works for, that's her job, she works for a modern slavery organisation, and she said, I can't believe how this exhibition doesn't have one single statistic anywhere. It's all, everything is being spoken through the art. And she said, I'm going to go away and talk to the comms team because we need to do something about this. So we're having feedback on lots and lots of different levels. And we are trying to make notes as we go along. Oh, sorry, did forget completely. I apologize for that. In fact, we do have, and I can show this, we do have, you can see it very well. This is a piece of Asmini's ball. She sat and she...
I'll put the white piece of paper behind us just so that you can...
Oh, that's better. Yes, she sat and unpicked a pair of jeans. That's better, yeah. And she's actually a weaver, and she started to unpick, and she was looking at threads. So she has got some prints of threads, and she's made rubbings, and then she started to unpick. And as she went along, it wasn't really her intention to unpick the whole pair of jeans, but she did. And then the whole family got COVID, and they all started to help to unpick. And what she was finding out was the more that she unpicked, the more it made her realize how very complex this whole crime of modern slavery is. That you try and solve one part of it or become aware of one part of it, and then realize that the repercussions are so much more. So this has been a good symbol, actually, and people often think that this, helps people to understand that it's not a quick fix problem, that it does take a lot to solve, and it will take a global effort to actually stop this crime.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the other thing to say about Asmini's work is, that she was really interested, like Melissa, in supply chains, and so in the material, but also in the time it takes to make these a ubiquitous pair of jeans, and the value we attribute to the labor or to the good at the end of the day. So I think when she was unpicking it, it made her really reflect on production of cotton, the indigo, the spinning, the weaving, the dyeing, the pattern making, the shipping, and then and then the fact that we can get a pair of jeans in for 50, 60, whatever, however amount it is, but it doesn't seem a proper relationship to the amount of labor that has gone in. And it leads to a lot of, I guess, fast fashion, it leads to a lot of exploitative practices.
And I think it's very interesting because whilst Asmini and Vanessa's work is very different, they're actually, from talking to people in the exhibition, it really works incredibly well to be able to link the two and to link the story of this crime together. So it feeds in very well. We've talked about Asmini's work and then moved to Vanessa's patchworks. And it's also interesting because Vanessa's patchworks are opposite Jonathan's paintings. And actually, the idea with Colombian architecture is a lot of the work has been, a lot of the buildings that have been reclaimed, they're bits of other buildings put together. So actually, we have two patchworks as well. And it's a bit like solving modern slavery. It's grasping one piece of information from somewhere and then putting it with another piece of information and building up a bigger picture, a patchwork of what's going on. So there's a lot of symbolism, really.
Thanks, Caroline.
Hannah in the chat says, thank you for responding to a question. And Tessa said, nice metaphor, I think, in relation to the unpicking of the jeans. I'm not sure when that came in. There's no other questions in the chat I can see at the moment. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Sorry, that's me looking at the participants. Did anyone have anything they'd like to add about each other's work at all? I don't know.
I think we've all just felt privileged to work together. It's been a wonderful several years to get to know each other's work and to put this lovely exhibition together.
I think very briefly, just echoing those comments from Melissa, certainly, but the fact that all of this was conducted remotely, as you might expect over the last couple of years, and really only having met some other artists, I obviously know Melissa and Judith from studies and things like that, but having the opportunity to finally kind of engage with not only the work but the artist, as opposed to this sort of format, was an interesting process to kind of work through, especially as the exhibition of sort of the time frame moved around a few times, and it was getting it collaboratively as well, our head around those sort of shifting goalposts was quite challenging. Very rewarding, I think.
Could you just give a short a bit of information for anyone who wants to visit the exhibition, like when it's on, for what times it's open?
Yeah, the exhibition is running until the 18th of April. It's open every day from 10 till 4, apart from Sunday, where it closes at 3 o'clock. So, and there are stewards on the whole time. So it's really, if people are keen to visit, it would be great to see you. And if you go up and ask a steward, they're very happy to talk about any of the exhibition pieces. There is a catalogue, which we have got, which gives information. And then
it's a very, very good catalogue.
Thank you. Well, Nicola's the designer of this. So there's the exhibition catalogue. There's also QR codes as well. So we've tried to make sure that accessibility is available in different formats. But people are very, very happy to talk about the exhibition with visitors.
Just a final question from Jackie Jones saying, there are various ways of collecting evidence-based feedback, and I wondered what your approach is and how successful you felt the exhibition has been in raising and reframing the issues.
Well, we've collected information through having a visitor's book, and there's lots of comments in there. We also have a disclose form, which we've had some feedback from, and we did ask for people to sort of write comments, to draw, to do diagrams. It doesn't have to be in a written format. So we've collected that. And the evidence from, a lot of evidence from the conversations, which is why we're trying to put that together. That's providing possibly the most informative information for us to work with. Then we've had information from the various activities and events that we've actually been running as well. So we've also had emails from people. And I suppose things like, we had some feedback from one of the conference, from when somebody actually who works with survivors of slavery. And her comment was that no sensitization about slavery, exploiting survivors' stories, or perpetuating trauma. And she felt that we got it absolutely right, or the artists, I should say, had got it absolutely right, that actually they were evolving a story around our complicitness in a crime that most of us don't know we're part of. And it was taking it away from the stories of the survivors and putting it out into the public domain much more. So there's been a huge amount of feedback that we're trying to work our way through.
Well, thank you everyone for participating in the event today. I'll round up there, if that's good. Thank you to Judith, James, Vanessa and Melissa, and to curators Nicola and Caroline. I've posted a link to the the website for the exhibition in the chat on YouTube. So do have a look at that if you're interested in seeing more, and do go and see the exhibition at the Hostry, at the Cathedral, that's on until the 18th. Okay, thank you, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. You've been brilliant.